Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're the show that really tries to take these big, sometimes dense ideas from our sources and, boil them down into something practical you can use right away.
And today, yeah, we're diving into something I think we all recognize. That feeling of being stuck in emotional loops, the
I think
predictable reactions.
exactly that. It's that exhausting thing where you know exactly how a conversation is going to go. Listener, think about that one person, maybe it's family, maybe an ex, could even be someone at work where you feel like you could just hand them a script.
hmm You know the trigger, you know the response. It's almost like clockwork.
It is, and that reliability, however frustrating, is actually really important according to our sources. It points to what they call pockets of unconsciousness.
Right. These aren't just like moments of losing your temper. They're described as these deep, programmed ego responses that just take over when a certain button gets pushed.
So that's our mission today in this deep dive. We want to give you a kind of blueprint, pulling from the source material, for how to spot these predictable moments, these unconscious zones, and then, crucially, how to use intense, really intentional presence to break free.
Yeah, to actually shatter those old reactive patterns of the ego, it's moving past just understanding why you react.
And into the how. How do you actually stop it in its tracks?
Exactly. And we have to start by acknowledging, just how incredibly strong this conditioning is. It's powerful stuff. The sources even bring up that famous saying.
Oh, the Ram Dass one. Yeah. It's such a perfect, immediate check-in. If you think you're so enlightened, go and spend a week with your parents.
It really cuts through, doesn't it? Because you can feel really centered. Maybe you meditate, you feel pretty balanced in your everyday life, your controlled environment.
Right, you've got your routine down.
But then you step into that old context,
Yeah.
childhood home, or maybe just meeting up with certain people from way back, and bam, all that carefully cultivated peace can just vanish. Yeah, instantly. The old roles, the old expectations, the unspoken stuff, it all rushes back. And that old self, that sort of child ego, just grabs the steering wheel again.
It shows how easily we get drawn into old reactive patterns, as
Yeah.
the source puts it. You lose that presence almost automatically because the triggers are just so ingrained, so potent.
Precisely. The familiarity itself is the trap. Okay, so let's get specific then. Section 1. Isolating these pockets of unconsciousness where you actually get triggered. We hear that word trigger thrown around a lot these days. In this specific context, escaping the ego, what does a trigger really mean according to the sources? It's defined quite simply, but it's deep. A trigger is basically anything could be a person, a situation, even just a place that causes you to become instantly unconscious.
Unconscious meaning.
Meaning you react immediately. You're not choosing your response anymore. You're running on that pre-programmed emotional track. The source material actually says if someone triggers you, they literally make you unconscious.
Wow. Okay. That's a strong statement. It's not just that they annoy you, it's that they switch off your awareness.
Exactly. The space between stimulus and response disappears. You're not responding consciously. You're just reacting.
So where do these triggers usually live? The first big category, the most obvious one probably, is relationships built on shared history. These relationship pockets.
Absolutely. The sources are clear that the biggest triggers often come from people we share a lot of past with. Parents are the classic example, of course.
Because those patterns were set so early on.
Right. When the ego is still forming, really vulnerable, you carry decades of accumulated stuff, expectations about how they'll act, how you should act.
Yeah, the expectation they'll criticize or that you need to be defensive or prove yourself.
It's all baked in before anyone even says hello. It's not just about what's happening now. It's the weight of all the lens pressing down.
That egoic density you mentioned, that makes sense. But it's not just family, right? The sources talk about other places too?
Oh, definitely. It extends way beyond family. Think about work or social circles. The source material points out how subtle it can be. Sometimes just seeing a particular colleague across the room can flip that switch.
Really? Just looking at them?
Yeah, if that person is somehow linked in your mind to, say, a past conflict, a project that went wrong, or maybe even just a feeling of rivalry, the visual cue alone can be enough to pull the ego into an old defensive posture, or maybe an aggressive one.
It's that instant internal shift.
Yeah.
That's the sign you've lost presence.
That's the signal. And then, of course, there's what you call the X factor. That seems like a whole different level of intensity.
Yeah, it feels like the ultimate test case for this historical weight thing.
It's uniquely challenging, for sure,
Yeah.
because it's often not just about disagreement. It can involve feelings of identity collapse, betrayal, loss, the need to be right.
All the really heavy stuff.
Right. So when you meet an ex, especially if the breakup was hard, all that accumulated pain, the old arguments, the sense of unfairness, it just surges back all at once.
Creating this super concentrated
I'm a lifter.
unconsciousness.
Exactly.
The pull to rehash the past, to defend yourself, to prove your point one last time. It's incredibly strong. The source really highlights this.
Right.
Meeting an ex without falling back into that reactive historical pattern, that takes immense presence, almost heroic, like you said.
Yeah.
You have to consciously choose, okay, I'm meeting this person now, not the ghost of the relationship.
Not the symbol of past hurt.
Mm.
It requires, like you said, an almost surgical separation from your own story about what happened.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack just with the relationships.
Yeah.
But let's shift to another area that trips people up constantly, even if it feels less personal sometimes. Money. The financial pockets. How does something like money, which is really just numbers and paper, become such a potent trigger for unconsciousness? Fascinating, isn't it? The sources trace this chain of association. Money itself doesn't directly trigger the ego in the same way a person might. Instead, it triggers a much more primal feeling, which is fear. When there are high stakes, financially buying, selling, investing, negotiating people often become incredibly reactive, deeply unconscious, because money is tied so tightly to fear.
And we usually think that's just fear of, losing money or making a bad deal. But the sources say it goes deeper, much deeper. It's laid out like this. Money connects to fear. Fear connects to the idea of scarcity. And scarcity connects all the way back to fundamental, often childhood-based ideas about survival.
Okay, so it taps into something really fundamental, like, will I have enough? Will I be okay?
Exactly. If the mind perceives a threat to survival, even unconsciously, it doesn't respond with calm, rational thought. It responds with panic, anger, defensiveness. Classic ego reactions.
So things like selling your house or arguing about a budget or even making a big investment, they're not just practical decisions, they're potentially activating these core survival programs, these unconscious thoughts that still live in you, as the source puts it. Precisely. Think about maybe a couple budgeting together. If one person feels the other is being controlling with money, the argument might seem like it's about the electric bill, but underneath, it could be a fight about autonomy, survival, fueled by that fear of scarcity, maybe from way back.
Or someone who considers themselves pretty spiritual, pretty calm.
Yeah. The sources give that exact example. Someone who's practiced presence for years can suddenly find themselves completely losing it, becoming very angry and upset over a relatively small amount of money when selling their condo hits a snag, because that deep scarcity trigger got pulled hard.
That link between money, fear, and identity is just incredibly potent, which leads us neatly into this idea of unconscious professions.
Right. This is a really interesting observation in the material. It suggests that certain jobs, think realtors, lawyers, maybe even doctors, sometimes frequently encounter people at their absolute peak of unconsciousness.
Because the stakes are so high in those interactions, life-changing moments.
Exactly. Think about the setting. Divorce court. Negotiating a settlement after an accident. A high-pressure business deal. Getting a serious diagnosis. Buying or selling a home that holds all your savings. These aren't calm, peaceful transactions.
No, they're often fueled by fear, anger, greed, resentment.
The ego is running rampant. The source points out that the clients, the people involved, are often operating from these profoundly unconscious states because their sense of self, their survival, feels threatened.
So the professional, the lawyer, the realtor is basically swimming in this sea of human reactivity all day.
Constantly immersed in it.
Yeah.
But, and here's the fascinating twist the sources offer. Dealing with these situations, these people where the reactivity is off the charts, could actually be potentially extremely enlightening.
Wait, how does being surrounded by drama lead to enlightenment? That sounds like the opposite should happen.
Because, the sources argue, navigating those situations successfully demands extraordinary sustained presence from the professional themselves.
Ah, I see. You can't get sucked in.
You absolutely cannot afford to. If your client is panicking or being totally unreasonable out of fear and you join them in that state, everything falls apart. You have to maintain clarity, composure, rational thinking, despite the emotional storm around you.
So these jobs almost become like forced presence training grounds.
In a way, yes. The ultimate test. Holding on to your own conscious awareness when faced with maximum reactivity from someone else, whether it's that angry client, the terrified patient, the greedy opponent, that's how you strengthen the light of presence, especially under pressure. Okay, so we've mapped out the minefield, the relationship pockets, the money triggers, these high-pressure environments. Now, section 2. The strategy. How do we actually navigate this? It sounds like it has to be intentional, planned ahead. That's the absolute key takeaway. The necessity of knowing before. You have to do a kind of personal inventory. Where do I consistently lose control? Where do I get very reactive? Where does the script feel totally predictable?
You need to know your personal trigger zones before you walk into them.
Yes, yes. So you can prepare. So you're not just ambushed by the reaction when it hits.
Okay, so let's say I know that calling my brother always ends in the same old argument. I don't just pick up the phone on impulse. I need to, what? Treat that call differently. You make it a practice. The source explicitly says, declare that known trigger situation a spiritual practice. A spiritual practice. Okay, how does that change things?
It completely reframes the goal instantly. Your main aim is no longer winning the argument or getting your brother to see your point or getting an apology. The primary goal becomes simply staying present during the call.
So the interaction itself is just the training ground for my present.
Exactly. The outcome of the conversation becomes secondary. The real win is maintaining your inner state of awareness.
I like that. It takes the pressure off trying to control the other person or the situation and puts the focus squarely on managing my own internal world.
Precisely. And the specific technique recommended for doing this in the moment is to actively turn up the light.
The dimmer switch idea, can you unpack that a bit? It sounds metaphorical, but is it? Is there an actual action involved?
It's very much an active, intentional act. It's not passive hope. You don't just wait and see if presence shows up. You decide to activate it deliberately. Just before you make the call or walk into the meeting room or as the difficult topic comes up, you consciously choose. Okay, turning up the awareness now. Yes. You bring intense focus to your internal state, to the present moment. This high wattage presence, as the source implies, acts like a barrier. It prevents that old habitual reactive momentum from just grabbing you and running away with the show.
Okay, but let's be real. This is where it gets incredibly difficult, right?
Yeah.
The sources must acknowledge this. That old emotional pull is so strong, you can decide, okay, I'm going to be present this time, but then your boss says that one thing.
And boom.
Yeah.
You forget all about the dimmer switch.
Yeah, the wave of anger or defensiveness just hits and you're gone, reacting on autopilot again. How do you make that intention actually stick when the trigger fires?
That is the core challenge. That's the practice. Those old egoic patterns have tremendous inertia, like a runaway train. And this is precisely why that knowing before part is so critical. It's non-negotiable.
Because if you wait until you're already feeling it,
It's too late. If you're already feeling the heat rise, the resentment kick in, the defensiveness surge, you're already unconscious. The momentum is too powerful to stop easily right then.
so the intention, the declaration, this is a spiritual practice that has to happen before you enter the situation, in the calm before the storm.
Exactly. It's like setting your anchor before the tide rushes in. You anticipate the high-risk zone, and you proactively deploy your present strategy.
It requires treating that upcoming interaction not just as another annoying phone call, but as a kind of sacred assignment for awareness.
Yes. And by doing that, by shifting your primary goal away from the external outcome, winning the argument and getting the deal, you've already weakened the ego's grip. The ego needs that outcome. If your main goal is just to stay present, you've taken away some of its fuel, making it much more likely you'll succeed in using the presence techniques. Okay, that makes sense. Which brings us perfectly to section 3, the actual techniques. The doorways to presence. How do we anchor ourselves when we're in that situation? The source gives two main ones. Let's start with doorway 1, the inner energy field, right? This one is very much about turning your attention inward into your own body. The instruction is to intensely feel the energy field of your inner body.
Okay, inner body energy. What does that actually feel like? Is it just breathing? Because people always say, just breathe. How is this different?
That's a really important distinction. Breathing is obviously part of being present, but this technique is more specific. It's about tuning into the subtle sense of aliveness that permeates your entire physical form.
Like a tingling. Or warmth.
It could be tingling, yes. Or feeling vibration, a gentle hum, sometimes just a sense of density or stillness within the limbs, the torso, the hands. The key thing is, it's continuous. Unlike the breath, which comes and goes, this background aliveness is always there.
Okay. And focusing on that continuous feeling serves a purpose.
Two vital functions, according to the source. First, it's an immediate, powerful anchor to the present moment, when your attention is rooted in that steady physical sensation.
The mind can't pull you away into stories about the past or future so easily.
Exactly. It grounds you in the now. It short-circuits the mental noise. Second, feeling the inner body creates what the source calls spaciousness.
Spaciousness.
Yeah, think of that inner energy field as this vast, still space within you. When the external situation, the angry words, the stressful demands, tries to make you feel tight, contracted, reactive.
Which is the physical feeling of reacting.
Right, that inner spaciousness acts like a buffer. It prevents you from immediately identifying with that fleeting rush of anger or fear. It gives you room to breathe internally.
So if I'm in that meeting and my colleague says something provocative, instead of letting my whole awareness get sucked into the drama of how dare they, I consciously shift, say, half my attention to the feeling of aliveness in my hands or my chest.
Precisely. You're deliberately splitting your attention. You're using the direct, unconditioned reality of your body's energy to counterbalance the conditioned historical reaction pattern of your mind. It's described as a very direct, very effective doorway into presence.
Okay, I can see how that internal focus could work. Now, what about doorway 2? This sounds quite different. Total acceptance. It operates differently, yes. If the inner body is about internal anchoring, this one is more about external non-resistance. The technique is to totally accept your experience of this moment, and that necessarily includes accepting whatever the other person is saying or doing in this moment. Hold on, though. That's where I, and probably many listeners, get tripped up. If I totally accept that, say my business partner is being completely unreasonable or my parent is being unfairly critical, doesn't that mean I just roll over? Doesn't that sound like giving in, like resignation? How do I accept without just letting them walk all over me?
That is the absolute crucial distinction, and the source material is very clear on this.
Yeah.
Total acceptance is not passive agreement with the content, and it's definitely not accepting a bad outcome.
Okay, so what am I accepting then? You are accepting the reality of this present moment, just as it is. So in your example, the fact of the moment is, my partner is expressing unreasonable demands, or my parent is speaking critically. That is what is happening right now. Okay, I accept that is happening, yes. Now, what does the ego usually do? It generates massive internal resistance to that fact. Thoughts like, they shouldn't be acting this way, this is unfair, I can't stand this. Right, yeah, absolutely. That's the immediate internal reaction. That internal resistance, that no to reality, that is what fuels your own reactivity. Total acceptance means dropping that internal resistance to what is. You simply acknowledge, okay, this is the situation right now, this is what they're saying, doing, so I accept the fact that they are angry or unreasonable, but that doesn't mean I agree with why they're angry or that I won't address the unreasonableness later.
Precisely. You accept the isness of the moment without fighting it internally. By dropping the resistance, you cut off the fuel supply for your own egoic reaction. Resistance is the ego's oxygen. If you meet their anger, not with counter-anger or defensiveness, but with a simple internal acceptance of the fact of their anger.
Then there's nothing for your reaction to lash onto.
Exactly. You stay present with what is. And from that place of non-resistance, of presence, you can then choose a conscious, measured response. Maybe that response is setting a boundary, maybe it's asking a clarifying question, maybe it's simply ending the conversation for now. But it comes from awareness, not reaction.
So both doorways, inner body focus and total acceptance, they lead to the same place, breaking the reactive chain.
Yes.
They are described as various doorways into presence. Different methods, same result. They pull you out of the mind's conditioned story and plant you firmly in the immediate, unconditioned reality of the stagey. All right, let's move to section 4 then, the payoff. Meeting without reference to the past. What actually happens when you manage this? When you stay present using these techniques in one of those known trigger situations? What changes in you and in the interaction itself?
The shift described is pretty fundamental. It's like a different part of you comes forward. When you become genuinely present, that usual personality, the one with all the history, the grievances, the roles you play, it becomes, as the source puts it, relatively unimportant.
The reactive self just fades back.
It takes a back seat, yeah. Because that personality, that ego self, it's really only half the picture. The other half, the source calls it the deep I, or the unconditioned present. That's the part that's naturally spacious, that isn't defined by history. And that starts to shine through.
And that deeper self is what allows for this idea of meeting someone without the past. That sounds so radical, especially with people you have decades of history with.
It is radical. It means you encounter the other person, even someone who represents, a lot of unpleasant past, deep hurts, ingrained roles, without filtering them through your mental archive of who they used to be or what they did before.
You're not interacting with the difficult mother label or the unreliable ex label.
Exactly. You're dropping the labels, the images, the historical narrative. You're meeting the actual human being who is right there in front of you in this moment through that deeper awareness, that deep I. And the source insists this capacity isn't something you have to build. It's inherent in you, just waiting to be accessed through presence.
I imagine for people listening who feel trapped in those really difficult family dynamics, just realizing they have the choice to step outside the old child-parent script and meet their parent as just another human.
Hmm.
That must feel incredibly freeing.
It's a huge doorway to personal freedom. And critically, the source really stresses this. The practice itself is sufficient unto itself,
Meaning?
meaning you're not doing it to change the other person. That's vital. The primary goal is your liberation, your freedom from compulsive reaction. If you can be in that difficult situation with that difficult person and you remain free from the grip of history, free from the urge to react automatically, then you are free, regardless of how they behave.
Right. We really need to underline that. This isn't some kind of like Jedi mind trick to make other people nicer. Absolutely not. If your hidden agenda is still, how can I use presence to make them change? Then the ego is still subtly running the show. The source is explicit. You don't need the other to be free too, for you to experience your own freedom. Your peace is internal, independent of their state. Okay, got it. Your freedom first. But there is this intriguing potential side effect mentioned, this almost miraculous transformation that can sometimes happen in the other person when you stay consistently present. How does that work, even if we're not aiming for it?
It's described as this beautiful, unlooked-for consequence. When one person in the dynamic shifts into genuine presence, becomes truly conscious in the interaction, the source says it often happens that the other person, maybe without them even realizing what's happening, also gets kind of freed up.
Freed from their own heavy personality, as the source puts it. How?
Well, think about it. Most reactive patterns are like a dance. They need two partners playing specific roles. If you're expecting me to argue back or get defensive or crumble, and instead I consistently meet you with calm, non-resistant presence.
Your usual moves have nowhere to land. The pattern gets interrupted.
Precisely. Your habitual reactive script sort of short circuits, because I'm not giving you the expected cue. Your ego doesn't have its usual opponent or victim to play against.
So when the adult child, for instance, consistently meets their parent with this absolute presence, the parent's ingrained way of relating to them might just dissolve because the old dynamic isn't being fed anymore.
That's the idea. It's like your presence creates an energetic space, an invitation for them to step out of their conditioned role too. They get a chance to meet the real unconditioned you, perhaps for the first time in years, which allows their unconditioned self to potentially surface as well, even if just briefly.
Wow, that's a powerful shift.
Yeah.
From two egos locked in their old battle.
Potentially two human beings actually meeting each other in the present moment. And it all starts with one person taking responsibility for their own state, making that commitment to presence, deciding that internal freedom matters more than winning the external game.
Okay, let's wrap this up then. Time for our outro.
Right. So, to quickly summarize this deep dive, the path to breaking free from these exhausting reactive loops starts with honest identification. You've got to really look at your life and pinpoint your specific pockets of unconsciousness. Is it family history? Is it fear around money? Is it certain professional pressures? Know your triggers. And once you know them, you don't just dread those situations, you reframe them. You treat them as opportunities for spiritual practice, intentionally deciding beforehand that your primary goal is simply to stay present. And you anchor that presence using one of the key doorways, either turning inward, intensely feeling the continuous aliveness of your inner body to create that grounding spaciousness, or turning outward in a way, practicing total acceptance of the moment's reality, including the other person's behavior, to starve your own internal resistance.
And the ultimate outcome isn't necessarily changing the world or other people, but achieving profound personal freedom. The freedom to meet anyone, even those with a heavy past, through the deep eye of presence, unburdened by history. That freedom is its own reward.
And while your freedom is enough, committing to your own presence can sometimes unexpectedly create the space for those around you to transform too. This whole approach gives you, the listener, a really practical method. Steps you can actually take to dial down the emotional drama in those parts of your life where the patterns feel the most stuck, the most painful. It puts the power back in your hands. So, for our final provocative thought this week, something for you to maybe chew on. The next time you find yourself facing a known trigger, that difficult conversation, that financial stressor, whatever it is for you, try to catch that very first flicker of reaction, that initial spike of anger or fear or defensiveness, and ask yourself, what specific part of this feeling is coming purely from memory, from the story I hold about this person or situation based on the past? And then the follow-up question, if you can see that historical narrative trying to take over, what piece of that old identity, that old story, are you willing to consciously drop right then and there? What are you willing to let go of to meet this moment completely fresh? That choice right there is where your freedom lies.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into transforming reactivity through presence.
Stay present, stay aware, and we'll see you next time on the Deep Dive.